This is UI Therapy, Episode 1. Cue the music. Welcome to the UI Therapy Podcast. My name is Jake Hopking, and I'm a user interface design and development expert, online user experience consultant, digital product designer, and I'm also a keen photographer and complete coffee addict. Each week, you're going to learn actionable strategies, mindsets, tips, and tricks that will help you take the guesswork and confusion out of designing and building beautiful and intuitive user interfaces. This podcast is your secret weapon in cutting through the paralysis of tooling, framework, and methodology analysis. And now, onto this week's episode. In this first episode, I'll be outlining who's it for and what it's about, why am I creating this, what the format's going to be, a brief introduction about me and my background, a bit of a rant on the state of the UI industry, particularly the development side of things, and finally where you can get in touch and suggest ideas and give me criticism and the like. So who's it for? So obviously it's for UI developers and UI designers, but it's also for people who are interested in machine-human interaction. And that could be anything from your standard desktop application experience or smartphone application or smartphone OS through to, more everyday household appliances like microwave ovens or your smart fridges or personal fitness trackers. They all have user interfaces, and behind each product has a team of UI designers and a team of UI developers. So if you fit into one of those three categories, then you will enjoy this podcast because I will be making it with you in mind. What's this podcast about? It's about user interfaces, of course. But beyond the obvious, it's going to be looking at technologies that are used in user interface design and development. It's going to be about the people making improvements in the industry. There's a lot of people that aren't making improvements, and maybe I'll get to that in a bit. It's going to be around, the general state of UI in our space. It's going to be covering tools, languages, patterns, methodologies, and obviously it's not just going to be about the web because, as I said before, the UI isn't just websites or applications. It covers everything that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. So for instance, in an upcoming episode, I'm going to be interviewing a games designer who's done a lot of research into user experience patterns that influence user interface decisions within the game. I guess an idea of what we'll be talking about. So basically anything with a screen that could really be talked about on this podcast. So it gives me quite a lot of scope. Outside of UI, I have interests in things like coffee, music production, photography, traveling, and that kind of stuff. So occasionally I might somehow integrate some of that into it as well, mix it up a bit. And just because you're a UI designer or UI developer or someone interested in those two things doesn't mean that you don't have other interests. So hopefully this can be a bit of a space for sharing more than just my job and my career and my expertise in those areas, but a bit more of that. Maybe that'll come in time as I get more comfortable with this medium, because getting this down has been quite excruciating. Let me move on to the name of the podcast. Why UI Therapy? Other than a subtle nod to Above and Beyond, if you know what that is. It's hard to say it. I get a sense, maybe not get a sense, I get a feeling that there's a lot of discontent out there in the design and development space around user interfaces. You see it in social media, see chains of threads of angst and anger sometimes about the direction that things are going, the tools that are evolving. You see it in the dev chats and Slack channels and forums even. I mean, that's still a thing, isn't it? Forums. I mean, sometimes I pop into a forum. People asking questions about, I'm confused. Where? In Reddit groups. How do I do this? Which framework should I choose? What software should I use? Yeah, should I use TypeScript? Should I use ES6? Should I keep to ES5? Should I be using async? What the fuck should I be using? It's so confusing for everybody that's coming into this industry. And I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and it's not getting easier. You think that as the industry, as this medium, primarily I'm talking about the web here, is maturing, you think that the tools will be maturing along with it, but it's not. It really isn't. I mean, the state of Node, for instance, and NPM is just fucked. Just trying to get a project up and running, if you're new to this, must be fucking incredibly frustrating. I mean, it does my head in enough of the time. I mean, sometimes just trying to use a package that you found in NPM will raise an exception that leads you down a rabbit hole of other errors and exceptions that you spend 3 hours trying to figure it out, and then you just fucking give up. And that's from someone who's pretty good at JavaScript. I mean, I can do anything I want in it, and sometimes you just want to pull your fucking hair out. So anyway, that's a bit of a rant about the industry. I mean, I will articulate that a little better as episodes go on, but that's the reason for this name. I want to do my bit to try and improve the state of things. I want to improve it. Yeah, I want to let people know, those that are coming into this industry, or those that have only been in it for a year or two, or those that are just even thinking about joining it or getting into it, that actually things don't have to be like this, and actually they haven't been like this for most of, well, particularly in my experience, most of the time it's actually been pretty fun place to be. It's been pretty easy. It's been pretty approachable. I mean, it's obviously always been a learning curve, and it's always been progressing, and it's always been advancing, and it's always been growing exponentially. And that's possibly the problem here, is that exponential growth suddenly gets to a point where it's out of control. And I think we're in that space at the moment. And I want this to be a platform for other people, other experts, other professionals that are feeling the same annoyance or frustration or whatever the particular adjective might be, that they can give a voice to those that are coming into this industry, that are just starting out, that are bashing their head against a wall, that are feeling like they are failing because they don't understand the latest framework, and suddenly the whole UI development has just shifted completely, or they're having to understand what the fuck is reactive programming, and that's just standard Angular now. These are huge concepts, and they're just being shoehorned into a framework. It's getting difficult. So with that rant kind of off my chest a bit, you get a sense of my frustration. And if you can relate to that in any way, then I want to hear from you, really. I want to talk to you. I want to bring you on, and I want to share your frustration with the community. I want to, and it's a big word to use, but I like to somehow get some movement going, get some momentum behind bringing things back to a simpler way. I think things don't need to be this complicated. We don't need a new framework all the time. We don't need new tooling all the time. We don't need a new version of framework X or library Y. What we need is some cohesion and genuine best practice. We need our leaders and our industry influencers to be on the same page, fighting the same corner, helping to move everybody in the right direction. We shouldn't be pulling each other away from our common goal, which is, well, what I believe is to make the web a better place, make the experiences of our applications and websites better for the users. That's all obvious, but we need to be also thinking about making things better for the people who work behind the scenes to bring those to the users, i.e. our UI developers, our user interface designers, and nurturing a collaborative way of thinking and being supportive of each other rather than this tribalism that goes around new tools and new frameworks and new toys, basically. How will I do that? How do I plan to make a difference here? Well, in no particular order, I'll be opinionated. I have been already, probably for the last 10 minutes. I will share my experience and champion those that are doing what I believe is the right thing. I will try and get them on the show. I'll try and interview them. I'll try and learn from them. I'll try and get them to share with you and people coming into this, particularly from an early point of their career or their journey in UI development or UI design, and let them know that they are the light to follow. This is the way that makes sense, really. Let's all work in this way because that will make things better for everyone. Another way I'll try and do this will be by basically being uncool and suggesting that perhaps we look at the past and look at how things were working before and perhaps learn from that again. Because, I mean, as an example, I was always a huge advocate of the whole separation of concerns. And for people who don't know what that is, basically, a web page is built out of 3 core technologies developers and designers are in control of. One is obviously HTML, the other one is CSS, and the last one will be JavaScript. And as a basic overview, for those who don't know what those things are either, HTML is for your content. So for instance, if you have a lot of text and a lot of images you need to display on a page, you need to wrap those in tags. And those tags are HTML tags. You'd have an image tag, or you'd have a paragraph tag, or you'd have a heading tag, or unordered list tags. Then to affect the styling, how those things appear on the screen, how the colors are, and how big the fonts are, and the background colors, how if there's a background image, or all that kind of stuff. That's all controlled by the CSS. And then finally, the last layer would be JavaScript, and that's used for adding rich interactions to a experience, website or application. So that's things like your image galleries, or your accordion menus, or your fancy hamburger menus, or all that kind of stuff. Now, as I said, they live in the old way of doing things on their own. There are 3 independent languages which come together to form a UI design on a web page. Now, because they're all independent and they're all defined languages with detailed specs, they're approachable on their own. You can come to a CSS file or a SCSS file, which is a more advanced form, which compiles down to CSS, and you understand it. If you learn CSS, you can open a CSS file and you can understand it. You can open a less file or a SCS file or a SAS file or a stylus file, and you can understand what's going on. Same with a JavaScript file. If you know JavaScript, you can open up that JavaScript document in your IDE and you can read through it and you can understand what's going on. HTML is the easiest, of course. You can just read it. But when you start combining the things into a single document and not just putting your styling at the top, your JavaScript to the top, and then your markup at the bottom, you're mixing it all up into what is essentially a mess. Unless you know what's going on, unless you know the framework, those 3 core technologies become unintelligible. And that's where I think the problem lies. I don't have a problem with using these 3 technologies, these 3 languages to create fucking cool shit and making experiences slick and responsive and snappy. And actually, I mean, I did rant about Angular before, just earlier. Even though technically they aren't separate, they do at least allow 3 separate files within a component that separate these things. So that's one good aspect. Whereas you can do this stuff in React as well, but there's a movement now where people are writing their styles, their CSS completely in JavaScript. And that's cool because you can have real CSS logic, but it's not being even written in a way that is easy. It's not the same as CSS. It's different syntax for one. And also it has a lot of overhead to the developer as well, actually, because you're not sharing this CSS application wide. And I know that's the point of this, to have them as component level state, but having to recreate your core styles for every single component isn't progress. It's a mess. So yeah, that's one example of what I think things are going wrong. Perhaps you get a sense of why that might be wrong, or maybe you don't. Maybe you don't give a shit. Maybe for you, this makes sense and I'm wrong. Maybe I am wrong. But my point here is that we have core technologies, and if we're going to go in this direction, then that needs to become a standard. It can't just be one group of developers that have decided to do so and then trying to make it cool for everyone to do, not really thinking about those coming in to the industry who are learning core stuff, and then suddenly they come into a project which is using React style components, and they're like, what the fuck? I mean, in this example, it's not actually that crazy. It's quite easy to use. But the point is that it's not the same, and it's adding more complexity and more confusion to something that doesn't need to be this complicated. We don't need it, really. I mean, we can perfectly do the same thing without it. Why am I making this podcast? Well, I think you've got a sense of why, from a personal point of view. I guess you could say passion about a certain way of doing things, or a certain belief, a set of values about development and UI that I feel are getting lost a bit. That's been something that I've been getting more and more frustrated with for many years. But why create a podcast now? Well, I was looking for a podcast that was covering the UI side in terms of design and development, and not just the web and not just apps. I wanted to listen to a podcast that was broadly covering all design from a UI perspective and all development from a UI perspective, giving them equality in terms of airtime and appreciation, actually. Because that's another thing I think is really important, is that UI designers and UI developers need to be a lot closer together in their working relationship and core understanding of their respective discipline. I mean, for a long time, in terms of web design history, we've been web designers. A web designer has been someone who can design a website and build it. And we've obviously moved away from that now. And we have core developers, front-end developers, and we have UI designers. And then going further, we have UX designers, UI UX designers. The problem, I think, now is that when the UX and UI journey finishes, that's it. There's no appreciation from the designers, at least, from some of the ones I've worked with. That's it. They don't care about the development side of things. They just finish their job and they hand over to developers, and that's it. They get on to the next design job. And also, on the flip side of that, actually, it's probably fair to say that most developers don't do design at all. They don't understand design. They think it's pointless sometimes. But I think there could be a lot of value in bringing these teams, these disciplines, these people, these areas of expertise closer together again. Make it more of a focus, make it more of a standard approach to design development. I mean, you see a lot in the startup space. For instance, a startup will want someone who can do both. And I think there's a lot of value in multidisciplinary jobs and positions and working environments. I think it's better for creativity. It's more, I don't know, you're more spontaneous. Yeah. If you're using both sides of your brain at the same time, you're going to have more insights. You're going to have a better understanding of the user and the client and the technologies that bring these two audiences together. If you're just in your own little world and you don't understand the other side of the same equation, essentially, I mean, UI design and development, they're the same. They should be one, but they're not really anymore. As I said before, there's designers and there's developers, and I would like for us to be closer. I mean, I do both. I've been doing both for 20 years. I never stopped developing and I never stopped designing. There's been periods of my professional history where I focused more towards design, and there have been periods of my professional history where I have focused almost entirely on development, years at a time. But I've never given up one side. I've never stopped completely. I mean, if I've been doing contract work on the development side, I've still been designing things in my personal side, or talking to designers on those projects and then actually working with them. Or I think that's one of the biggest values about developer that really understands design. You can give that developer you can give them one design, one mock-up, and then they can interpret it very, very well, and they can build out a whole application based on a single design. But if you give a developer that has no appreciation for aesthetics and no understanding of UI design a mock-up, they'll be able to do that mock-up perfectly, but then their ability to translate that into further pages and abstractions will be lost. It'll be impossible for them. So I think probably more important for developers to understand design than it is for designers to understand development. I think it's important as well for designers to understand how developers work and what the limitations are of frameworks and what the limitations of languages are. I think that is really important, because it really helps with the design side. I mean, for personal experience and from working with others that have a similar kind of background to me, is that when you're designing things, you know how that's going to be built, you know what's possible. So when you're creating mock-ups, developers don't come back to say, how do I build that? How can I do that? It's not possible. You don't waste that time. Then the designer doesn't have to go back and redesign it because they didn't understand how the development process works. So I think there's a lot of value in bringing these two disciplines back together in some shape or form. I'm not suggesting that everyone needs to be, proficient coder to also, every designer needs to be a proficient coder, or every developer has a strong background in typography and color theory or fonts. But just, I guess, some core understanding and appreciation for both sides, I think everyone should have. So that's the why. It's a long why. I can't believe I've been talking at this microphone, maybe ranting at it for quite so long, but editing will help, I'm sure. I'll get down to my target. I was going to talk about my background, but actually I covered quite a bit of that already, and I don't think it's worth spending any more time on that actually. I mean, maybe in the future if there's somehow someone wanting to know more about my history, then I'm going to share, of course. I guess on to the format and the frequency of the podcast. I plan to do a weekly release. It may be maybe twice a month, but I would like to do once a week. And yeah, the format will ideally, in time as I can get some guests on the show and get some interviews going, then primarily be interview based, because I want to, as I said already, I don't want there to be a diatribe from me towards the industry. I would like to be more inclusive than that. I would like to get people on, maybe if they don't share my same opinion, I'd like them to tell me why. And I would like to learn potentially why I'm wrong, if I am wrong. I mean, if you can't be open to other opinions and fight your corner, then I think you're a lost cause. So I would like to be challenged on my beliefs, and yeah, I'm happy to fight for them. But I'm also happy to step down if I feel that I'm wrong. So there'll be the occasional solo diatribe. There'll be primarily interviews. I'd like to share some of my case studies from my personal experience and some of my client work. Things I've learned along the way, some user experience stuff, maybe not so much user experience stuff. I mean, I have a strong appreciation for user experience, but it's not something that fires me up. Yeah, UI stuff. I love creating component libraries, style guides. So there'll be quite a bit of that, I think. I'll do some reviews. I'll do reviews of not necessarily cutting edge stuff, but I think I'll do some reviews of things that are proven, that have been around for a long time and are still being used a lot today. And perhaps, give some focus and some attention to stuff that's already out there, stuff that already works really fucking well. And let's maybe, learn from that. If we're going to, there's nothing wrong with creating something new if it's better, but creating stuff new for the sake of it is a waste. So if we can learn from all this amazing stuff that we've already have, that is still going, and then create something new that is genuinely better, then great. I'm all for that. I think that kind of covers it all. Thank you. If you've got to the end of this and you are still listening, I think you deserve a pat on the back. You deserve a pint from me at least anyway. I think I'm impressed that you got to the end. I was impressed I got to the end actually as well. Thank you so much for listening. I'm massively appreciative of your time. Genuinely honoured that you spent, if you've got to this point, 30 odd minutes listening to me rant at your ears and giving me your time. That's super awesome. Really cool, actually. So if you want to get in touch, then you can head to the website, which is uitherapy.fm. On there, you can sign up to the newsletter. I will send out probably a newsletter once a week with, stuff I've learned this last week, with tips, tricks, and something behind the scenes stuff, or some like extra interview things, or some things that didn't make it to the podcast, some like extra cuttings or some photographs, or if I'm at an event, photographs and that kind of thing. There's also a Google form on the website that you can use to, give me some suggestions or share your ideas. Yeah, I'd love to hear your ideas, really. What you want this podcast to be. I mean, I know what I want it to be, but it's not all about me. I'd like it to be about you and what you want to learn. And if I can help you understand stuff that you're struggling with, or if I can help you in those kind of ways, that'd be great. If you have any guests that you'd like me to approach, or any guests that would like to be on the show, or perhaps even you would like to be on the show. If you're a professional UI designer or UI developer, or someone who's associated to this or has some pretty cool insights into these spaces, but it isn't necessarily a UI designer developer, then cool. I'd love to have you on. Please get in touch. You can get hold of me on Twitter. The podcast is UI Therapy. There's also on Instagram with the same name. You can send an email to the show, which is show@uitherapy.fm. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And I will see you again next week with something less ranty and something more educational, something more useful, something more tangible. Show notes for this episode can be found at uitherapy.fm. If you enjoyed listening, one really easy way to support this show is to leave a quick rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts, as it really helps other people find the show. If you have any feedback or questions for this or any other episodes, you can reach me on Twitter @UITherapy, or I'm @JakeHopking. Or you can send an email to show@uitherapy.fm. Thanks so much for listening to UI Therapy, and I'll catch you next time. Cheerio.